It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 109, in the middle of the Australian federal election campaign, and plenty going on around the world, of course. And joining me, as usual, is Jack from Hong Kong. Hong Kong Jack, how are you, mate?
I'm well.
Let's kick it off with Australian politics. Into the second week of the campaign now. Polling showing the possibility of a majority government for Labor. News poll has 52-48. That seems to be pretty much where the rest of the polling is at the moment, somewhere between that 51-49 and 52-48. Labor's primary vote remains still in the doldrums, but we have to remember that Labor won power in its own right, 78 seats in the 151-seat parliament in 2022, with 32.5% of the primary vote. The polling's showing it thereabouts at the moment. But we have a long way to go, Jack.
We do. I believe there was a debate yesterday.
There was what, sorry?
A debate.
Well, there has been a leaders' debate on Sky News that involved Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese, of course. On my analysis of it, I considered it a bit of a draw. There were questions from the floor, from the audience, that were supposed to be undecided, and both handled them quite well. And at the end of it, it was Anthony Albanese was declared the winner with, I think, about 44 votes to about 35, something of that order.
I watched Christopher Pine and Bill Shorten, who come on, was it 7:30 report?
Oh, yes.
And I thought Bill Shorten made the most sense. He said he thought that probably Anthony Albanese had won the debate, but he said really the people who were going to decide this election were not watching the debate.
It was on Sky News, which is a cable television network, so it doesn't have a wide expanse. It's easier to be accessed by people in regional Australia, but in the cities, those people who don't have a Foxtel connection would be missing out. There was also a debate between the Treasurer and the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers and Angus. I just want to call him Angus Fraser all the time, Angus Taylor. Not a lot of discussion on who won it, other than it's probably one of those things that very few voters out there would have paid much attention to.
Yes.
There is a big debate coming, and I think it's Sunday night, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, where Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton will be on the ABC. That's the first national debate that's been held on the ABC for many, many years, Jack. You'd have to take me back, I reckon, certainly before the 2010 days.
I think it goes back to Ray Martin days almost, where Ray Martin took over the hosting role, on Channel 9.
So I guess that'll be the one that most people watch. I guess, well, look, we saw one debate last year where the consequences were enormous in the US presidential debate, the first one in June, where Joe Biden had that terrible frozen moment, and it was pretty much the end of his political candidacy. But generally speaking, Jack, unless you have that big moment, either a frozen moment or someone going off script badly, the debates are very, very much sort of stage-managed events, aren't they?
They are. They used to matter a little more. They always said that John Kennedy won the presidency by his first debate appearance because he was better at television than Richard Nixon. And there was a memorable moment when Ronald Reagan was debating Walter Mondale, and the questioner asked Reagan about his age, And he said, "I'd just like to say that I'm not going to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him during the course of this campaign." And Mondale just giggled at it and laughed. But you could see on his face he thought, that's just about the election gone out the window.
And Reagan won 49 states at the election. Yeah, look, there are significant moments, generally speaking.
But they are rare, you know.
One significant moment as the Garbos pull up to my driveway, apologies, listeners, one significant moment in the campaign thus far is the backflip with Pike and somersault from the opposition, and Peter Dutton in particular, over the work from home plan. Now, the work from home plan was designed to affect only Commonwealth public servants, and then it was reduced to Commonwealth public servants working in Canberra. It goes sort of cap in hand with the Coalition's decision to cut more than 40,000 public servants, which also got watered down to a retirement or reduction by attrition. But the work from home stuff, Jack, the Coalition said, oh, look, we were verbaled by Labor, and they argued this from an intellectual point of view from the outset. So they weren't saying we don't think Canberra public servants should work from the office 5 days a week, or they were saying that. But more broadly, they were quoting studies. Jane Hume was saying it costs productivity by about 20%, according to one study that she latched onto. And the message across the community was, you don't like work from home. So it wasn't just a group of Canberra public servants that this affected. It was people who work from home generally, and not that they thought that the Coalition would take their work from home practices away from them, but that the Coalition was effectively calling them bludgers, and that was the worst part of it.
Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, is instituting much the same policy with New South Wales state public servants, but has carried the debate quite well. And that's because he's phrased it in terms of, look, state public servants are not going to get privileges that other people in the community don't get.
That was the angle, but also the politics of the Minns announcement, I think August of last year, were particularly acute. It was politics. It was playing politics and messaging to the community without any real outcome. So when Minns said, "I want public servants to get back to work," it didn't create a timeline or a deadline for them to do so. And
I think there is a timeline, but yeah,
and then left the department heads to offer their discretion on who should get work from home privileges and who shouldn't. So it was an announcement about nothing really, and it was very good politics, as you say. But this is different because it happened in the period of a fake campaign. And it was an absolute disaster. They've also locked up Jacinta Price, who's probably their best campaign, or potentially their best campaigner, certainly seen as a person of integrity by a large number of Australian voters. But they've had to basically sideline her because they made her the Doge boss. And so that's the sort of spectre of Trump that really now they are desperate to avoid. Yeah, so can you remember in your long memory of Australian election campaigns a major policy platform being flipped not in the middle of the campaign, at least in the first week of the campaign?
Yeah, it certainly happened. I can't give you an example offhand, but it has happened. And I'm not sure this is a major policy, but it's a policy. Yeah.
Oh, well, both parties are a bit light on for policy, Jack, and we'll get to energy in a minute because the Coalition has released its costings around energy, around their gas policy, but there isn't a lot of stuff around, and so in the absence of that, it just struck me as incredibly dumb to be talking to the electorate by saying, we think people who work from home are not as productive as their people as their colleagues at work in the office place, and there's no doubt it was signalling to people who don't have work from home, so people like tradies, that sort of thing. It was telling them, well, these public servants need to go back to work, but it seemed to be ignoring the case that perhaps the tradies' wives, a good number of them, or their partners, will be working from home. And cutting costs in terms of transport, cutting costs in terms of childcare, and really on the basis of all of these studies, once you have a good look at a chunk of them, there is no doubt there is no 20% reduction in productivity. The balance of all of these studies indicate that the most rigorous sort of task that's undertaken in a work from home scenario, the people tend to be far more productive in that case. When they're doing sort of more mundane tasks, the productivity can drop off. That's what the studies tell us. But, Jack, as I said, the Coalition has released the modelling. They'd announced the policy a couple of weeks ago. And the Coalition has claimed, and Frontier Economics has supported this, that it will slash wholesale gas prices to $10 a gigajoule, easing household gas bills by 7% a year, because gas-fired generators supply about 10% of the electricity consumers draw from the grid. The modelling from Frontier Economics said it would also cut power bills by 3%, about $60 a year. Not a lot of money, but what I like about this policy, Jack, is that it is not the first time. I mean, there have been many efforts by governments previous to try and change this extraordinary situation where we have mining companies pulling our LNG out of Australian seas without paying any royalties for it, really just the cost of extraction, loading it onto a boat, and in some cases not to any dedicated export market, but selling it on the spot price for as much money as they can make. And so this seeks to change that by placing an export, I guess you call it a tariff, Jack, an export cost on those mining companies who are taking LNG from Australia and selling it to overseas markets. That's what I like about it, because this stuff's got to end. I mean, these are Australian resources that we are getting zero from. It's shameful. And we know where the policy came from, don't we, Jack?
I think it was the John Howard government.
Yeah, good old John, good old honest John. And basically just giving away Australian resources to mining companies who are enjoying profits. There are no royalties paid as it stands. There is a petroleum super tax in place, but it works outside that. And really that's what I like most about this policy, that at least Peter Dutton is trying to break that horrible arrangement where we are losing all our resources and paying, at the same time, paying the absolute optimum price for gas when we have got probably more gas reserves than pretty much anywhere else on Earth.
Mm-hmm. What I would say about it is that if we're going to persist with transitioning away from coal to renewables, we're going to need gas.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Look, we
have cheap gas, so we should be using our own cheap gas.
Trouble is, it's not cheap, Jack. We're paying sort of end user prices.
Mm.
So the premise of this is that the LNG will be piped down to Sydney and Melbourne from Queensland. And now there is some doubt about the costings. We aren't talking about significant amounts of money, 7% reduction in gas bills, about a 10%, or power bills down by 3%. Now they're reasonably significant savings, but they're not huge. So it's not a game changer in that respect. And there are some doubts about those costings. One fellow Rick Wilkinson is the chief executive of a consultancy, Energy Quest. He said getting gas from Wallumbilla, which is in Western Queensland, to Sydney costs $2.36, and if you want to move it down to Melbourne, that's an extra 58 cents. That gets you to $12.94. And when we think about $12.94, $12.97 is the coalition's costings in getting gas to Melbourne or Victoria. So not a lot of difference there. As I say, the one thing that strikes me about this policy that is effective is that it breaks that terrible hold these mining companies have on us over our natural resources. And I think the coalition deserves a big tick just for doing that. Haven't heard from companies like Wesfarmers and how they've replied. There'd be Origin and their exploration companies who have been sitting pretty on these huge profits for a long time. The miners tend to get a bit uppity though, Jack.
They do. They're very good lobbyists.
They're very good lobbyists, but nothing so far. And I would think it would be a fairly easy argument. Any argument that they had would be fairly easy to knock over.
Well, we'll see.
All right. Well, that's the state of play.
One thing before we leave Australian politics, that's missing, in my view, from the election campaign, is that nobody's addressing the bigger questions of how we have better living standards in Australia, and that involves, how do we increase productivity, all those sorts of things. No one's talking about that at all. All it is a handout. It's simply a battle of handouts, which is a mistake.
One of the things, I mean, it's not as if housing hasn't been mentioned. It has been mentioned far and wide, but neither party has a specific policy trying to address it. I mean, the Albanese government would point to its current policy in place, $10 billion to be spent on social and affordable housing, these sorts of things. They will say, we've sort of got it right. But no one's actually looking at these major reforms that need to happen. If you're talking about productivity in the workplace, Jack, if you've got someone who lives an hour and a half's train ride away from your workplace and has to clamber onto a train at 7:30 in the morning and then gets home at 6:30 at night after an hour and a half on the train, if you're lucky, if the drivers aren't on strike or if there isn't some terrible disaster, that person is not going to be as productive as the person who lives in the same suburb as their place of work. So these are housing issues are driving a lot of problems in our economy, Jack.
But we know from the 1980s that the only way to fix what's wrong with the Australian economy is to redesign part of it to improve the productivity. That's what the Hawke and Keating government did in Australia. It's what the Thatcher government did in Britain. And it's what the Reagan government did in the United States, and it improved the economies.
This is all long ago stuff, Jack. Before we had a housing crisis, this is why housing is so important to get right, and knowing it that if you want to create a sensible housing policy, you would do so knowing that it is going to make a certain sectors of the community unhappy, and that's why governments now and in the past have not really addressed it. It is a major driver of productivity. I mean, if you drive around Sydney's roads for an hour and a half every day there and an hour and a half back, man, you're not going to be productive once you get to the office. It's as simple as that.
And neither party is prepared to talk about making hard decisions and making part of the community unhappy. It's a very weak campaign, in my view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm really staggered that housing has not played a really significant part. It is one of the reasons that we don't have productivity in our economy. It is a very, very substantial contributor to it. All that stuff from the 80s. People could still live in Fitzroy and go to work in the CBD, Jack. Now you can't afford to live in Fitzroy. Now you've got to go and live in South Morang and make your way into your workplace on a daily basis from there. It is just one of the problems that we have. not least of all, the problem is that a lot of people feel disaffected and feel disconnected from the economy and the community because they can't afford to buy a house. Or if they can, they've got to buy one two hours drive from the CBD.
I'm upset on the behalf of the people from South Morang for you because you're sledging them. You know.
We used to knock them over in cricket pretty easy. Geez, they were easy beats back in the day, mate. They really were. I mean, there was no one there.
There was three kangaroos living out there.
South Morang pub and a couple of houses dotted around. Now it looks like Greensboro would have 30 years ago. It's just all houses out there now. But look, we'll leave the Australian. Well, I just want to talk one more thing, Jack. The Greens have sent a list of demands to Labor in the event where Labor forms minority government and would need their numbers. At this stage, it looks like Labor might get 74, 73, 75. May not need the Greens on the crossbench, but those demands include reforms to negative gearing and capital gains associated with selling the family home. Thoughts?
Labor will and should just ignore this because the Greens are not going to vote with the Liberals. The Green votes are pretty much owned by Labor. You haven't got to make a deal with them. You haven't got to have a ridiculous wedding ceremony with sprigs of wattle in your lapel because they're going to vote for you anyway.
Absolutely right. But at the same time, I think Labor are open to attacks from the right, saying that they're too close to the Greens, and one of the things that we don't want is a Labor-Greens coalition in government. And these things must be causing Labor some concern. But I just wanted firstly just to ask you about, and look, there's no specific detail on what the Greens want to do in terms of negative gearing and so forth. I mean, Shorten went to the people in 2019 with a policy of withdrawing or having no negative gearing on new housing. That was the policy, and of course they got belted. There were some little bits of tinkering around the capital gains tax on the house, on houses, but there are other things around franking credits and so forth. It's caused Albanese a little bit of concern, and he's constantly being asked about these things. Will you now have to address negative gearing?
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that the information I'm getting is that the Greens are not going to go quite so well in this election, that their vote's all right, but they're going to lose some seats.
There's, on the YouGov stuff, which covers the 151 seats, Jack, Labor leads in Griffith, which it lost to the Greens, and Brisbane, which I think the coalition lost to the Greens in 2022. And those seats are said to be up for grabs. Labor thinks it's half a chance in the outer eastern seat of Monash, where Russell Broadbent, I should say, is running as an independent. The Liberal, I think he's the father of the house, Jack, who did not get pre-selection. That's going to muddy the waters a little bit. I noticed that Albo very slyly made a reference to Russell and said, poor guy, needs a bit of help. But really what he was doing was sort of trying to get Russell's vote up so Labor might just sneak in and win that seat.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to see where Labor picks seats up, besides the two or three I've mentioned. There are a few others there. I see Chris Bowen's in all sorts of trouble in polling. It's not YouGov polling and it's just small seat stuff, but he got 19% of the primary vote, Jack.
Well, I have been saying for some time I don't think he's going very well.
Well, I think the other thing about the coalition's gas policy, I mean, the nuclear policy, no one's even talking about it. It's like it doesn't exist. It's been taken into witness protection. But the gas policy drags Bowen out. As the nuclear policy sort of hasn't been mentioned, it basically meant that Bowen was sort of free to, speak wherever he wanted to and didn't face too many hard questions. I think that the coalition's gas policy at least will drag him out into the debate. We'll see how he goes on. how he gets on there.
I mean, he's got a problem. Is that the whole net zero thing is okay in theory. People support it in theory, but the support drops away very, very quickly as soon as people decide that it's going to cost them more money.
Yeah, it depends on how you see it. If you do have renewables, I mean, the way it should work is once your economy functions on renewables only, no more gas needed, and we're talking about some 20 years down the track, you will have lower cost energy because fundamentally you don't have to extract anything from the ground and throw it into the furnace and set fire to it.
I don't think there's any faith in the community that that's doable.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on who you talk to. But if you think you've got the mix right on renewables, it will, going forward, always be cheaper because you do not have to extract from the ground and put it into a furnace.
Yeah, and like I say, I don't think people are buying that. And
well, it's true. It just is true, isn't it? Because you've got cost in extraction, you've got cost in transport to generation. Then you've got and then you've got the actual business of loading it into a furnace.
You misunderstand me. I'm not saying that people don't believe if you could run an economy on solely renewables, it would be cheaper. They believe that. What they don't believe is that's doable, that you can run an economy on renewables only. And I think
it's not just renewables. I mean, it depends. I mean, we're not just talking about solar and wind. We are talking about pumped hydro. We are talking about the pumped hydro is the way you can develop that high level of energy to have things like aluminium smelters, steel smelters, those sorts of things. So, I mean, the problem has been, Jack, is that we had a government who was in power for 10 years up until 2022 who did not have an energy policy. And when they finally developed one, they left it to the Nats for 2 weeks who simply tore it apart. I mean, the only reason they have a nuclear policy now is not because of Gina Rinehart or any of these other sort of conspiracy theories. It's because a nuclear policy was the only way the Nats were going to start contemplating net zero, carbon mitigation, these sorts of things.
Anyway, I think the reason why Chris Bowen's polling so badly, if it is 19%, is partly because he's got a very difficult sell. It looks okay in theory, but I don't think people are buying it.
All right, let's move on. It's time to get to America, and there's plenty going on there. Jack, tariffs. Well, let me just put this question to you now. Knowing what you know, it's come overnight through the United States. Has Donald Trump blinked?
I think he was under some pressure, not because of the share market. That doesn't really matter so much. The bond market does.
Yeah, bond market was perilous.
Bond yields were pushing up to 5%, and that was putting some pressure on. Whether he blinked, it depends who you talk to. Some people have a whole lot of different opinions about this. I would say this: we're at lunch on the first day of a test match. There's a long way for this to play out.
Well, look, I fully understand that. It seems now more and more to be directed, if not just specifically at China, but at Southeast Asia, Jack. Obviously, the EU are in there too, but we have extraordinary tariffs, 125% tax on Chinese imports to the United States. There is a reciprocal tariff there now too. Vietnam, I think, 47% tariff. The Philippines, I think 17. Singapore, there's the standard 10. The standard 10 is still in place, by the way. The only thing what has changed is that Trump has decided to delay the imposition of many of these new tariffs, like the ones on Vietnam, etc., for a 30-day period, or 90-day period.
Yeah, and the Vietnamese are in the process of negotiating, and they've made some offers already. And I think the Thais have as well, and the Japanese are in the process of doing so. like I say, it's lunch on the
Well,
first
they
day.
talked about that, Jack. Trump was bragging that everyone's ringing him, trying to kiss his ass. But the Japanese government yesterday said they will hold a meeting to prepare a comprehensive response. But Trump went on to say that the Japanese and he were going to meet, a high-level delegation were going to meet in the White House, but the Japanese have said no such thing. So in terms of negotiations, if we don't listen to Trump, which is always a little bit unreliable, there's not a lot going on there in terms of.
Well, I'm not listening to Trump. I'm looking at what the local Asian papers are saying about what the Thais and the Vietnamese and the Taiwanese are doing, and the Koreans are talking about doing. So yes, there is some movement there. But like I say, we're at lunch on the first day.
Well, lunch has involved the getting to lunch on the first day, Jack, has meant the loss of $9 trillion just gone from markets. Now, markets did recover today. The S&P 500 recorded its largest rise since 2008, but is still behind where it was in January.
I'm just waiting for the, what's it called, Truth Social post to say, I've caused the largest rise in the Standard & Poor's 500 since 2008, and taking credit for it.
Oil prices have jumped. The other thing that you were referring to, Jack, is US bonds have recovered, but they shot to lows that increased the possibility of a debt crisis in the United States.
But the reason the yield matters is once you get to, say, 5%, that means it's costing you 5% for the US government to borrow the money, and that becomes a problem given the size of the debt. So that's why it's more important than the share market. The $9 trillion doesn't disappear; it's just taken out of the share market and gone somewhere else.
Well,
and people are sitting on their money. That's the real risk with the share market.
Well, big money has sought safe havens.
Yes, that's right.
But there are a few little gaps in all of that, Jack. So, and US bonds is one of them.
And just before we leave the share market, can I say that the spike yesterday? I've read some reports that would indicate that a fair bit of that spike is the big players, funds selling into that spike, taking advantage of a little bump. So who knows where that will end up over the next week or so.
Yeah, well, that's the stock market. We were talking about bonds. So basically, what interest rate sensitive 2-year yields rose 6.2 basis points to 3.732, and are heading for their largest daily increase since March 24. They earlier reached 3.435. So these are US bonds. Now, what we'd expect in this time of market turmoil is that big money would move from equities markets into sort of safe havens like bonds and into currency. But the currency hasn't happened either, due largely to a lot of sell-off of the greenback in Asian markets. So that didn't quite work. Gold prices rose as you would expect in times of turmoil, but the gold prices have since come down. My statement is that basically if you continue to provide uncertainty around the US market, then big money will go elsewhere. And that's the problem. And then you do have debt crises, potential debt defaults, particularly if the Congress can't get their act together, and they've shown in the past that they can't. And those are the big issues. Trump talks about, well, he went from 1.6 trillion in private investment in the US to I think 4 trillion in a statement. When you break that down, there's 500 billion from Apple. There's 500 billion from one of the big AI companies. The AI stuff, that was all done during the Biden administration. And the 500 billion that Apple are going to spend, which includes an assembly plant in West Texas, not West Texas, but Texas. And once you take that out, the investment from Apple is pretty much what it's been in the past. So these are the things to watch. GDP growth in the United States already signs around northern US, particularly on the border with Canada, that these places are in recession now. If GDP growth in the United States is lower than that in other major markets, let's say Europe or China, then the money will go there. The money will go to these higher yields, based on economic growth. So if they do slip into recession, and I think Macquarie Bank said there was now a 60% chance, it had gone up from 40 prior to the Liberation Day announcements. If we're at 60%, maybe that's the heat's come off that a little bit now, but 60% chance of a recession in the United States going to impact the rest of the world, of course, going to slow growth everywhere else. But if the United States has slow to negative economic growth, you will find big money will go elsewhere. All right, we've done the negotiation.
Their last recession was what, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, and these were the last US recession was during the pandemic. They haven't had one since. We've skated away from that. Their last recession was during the pandemic, of course. But all of this seems, Jack, just completely unnecessary. I mean, if you had a problem with tariffs, you'd sit down with individual nations and say, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're upset, rather than introduce these sweeping tariffs across the world based on an equation. I mean, there's more and more saying that the equation, there was a report in CNN, an economist had looked at the equation and said, no, you've got that wrong. You're actually going to increase the tariff 5% more than you need to. So these things, these things were done on, basically on a wing and a prayer. In terms of how it affects the economy, well, McKibben did some modelling. Now, I know you're not enthused by economic modelling, but just bear in mind, this is what we were saying about US GDP. Without a global retaliation, without any sort of Liberation Day, with Liberation Day and the tariffs as they stand at the moment, without reciprocation from other nations, US GDP would be 2.2% less. And it goes on to say US GDP would also remain suppressed over the long term. Compared to a scenario with no reciprocal tariffs, global retaliation against America would result in US GDP being 0.6% less than otherwise by 2040. So that, just to clarify, with reciprocal tariffs, US real GDP in 26 would be 2.2% less than in a world with no tariffs or no tariff Liberation Day announcements, and 0.6% just as it stands. So some pretty ugly stuff. Manufacturing and agricultural production, this is in the United States, would be devastated in the event of global retaliation against America, being reduced by manufacturing 17% and 13% for agriculture in 2026 alone. Mining production would take a 9% hit, while production in the energy sector would be down by about 4%. All of that's disastrous for the American economy. And part of the problem they've got, Jack, is that what they're trying to do will create an isolated economy. And we know what isolated economies are, because before the Hawke-Keating reforms, tariff reforms, which were done with a lot of pain, a lot of electoral pain, by the way, we know that we lived in a highly protected economy, and things that you're paying more than you need to for the goods that are made in your own country, because isolated businesses become lazy businesses, and innovation goes out the window, and labour gets sluggish. So two people are needed to do the same job that one did previously. And this is the problem they've got. This is the madness of the whole thing, that you can drag everything into the United States, make it an isolated economy, tariff laden in its exports, and that somehow Americans will consume these goods at a higher price and lesser quality. So that's what's nuts about it. Let's have a look at a few quotes here.
That's if that's where it ends up.
Well, it may well be. I mean, is there an end game? Has Trump got an end game? I don't think he. I don't think he thinks he does. I mean, what we've seen with his tariff policy since the first announcements about tariffs to Canada and Mexico back in February. It is just he basically announces it and then walks them back, and announces them, walks them back, announces them, walks them back. I mean, what do you think his motivations are?
No idea. I don't speak to him, but no idea what his motivations are. What I see this as an assertion of American economic muscle, and there's a lot of support within the US across the party lines for this, has been for 25 years. In fact, this is more of a Democrat
in the erratic, hopeless way it was rolled out.
No, not in the way it's rolled out, but there's a great desire in the United States to assert its economic muscle. Across the party lines, people feel that the Americans have been getting the wrong end of the stick. And this is, you can go back, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, they're all on record saying this. Now, whether he's doing it right or wrong, time will tell. But that's what it's about.
Time is here right now. I mean, you're not running for public office, Jack. I mean, so you don't have to give me the non-answers. I mean, the rollout of this thing has been a disaster. It's affected markets. It's affected superannuants in retirees in the United States on their earnings right now. Yeah. There is a very strong chance that it will drive the US economy into recession. Whether that's enduring or just technical, we don't know. We don't know these things. But the better response surely was not to stand in front of the mirror and muscle up, show off his pecs. The best thing to do was to sit down with individual countries, particularly the ones that were causing the most grief, and that might be China and that might be the EU, and make your point. And then if there's no listening, if there's no negotiation, no serious negotiation, that's when you impose tariffs and you have your reciprocal arrangement. Right now, Trump is just saying this is the way it is, and if you don't like it, tough luck. But as it stands, the greater risk is being taken on by the US economy.
Yeah, my point is this is very popular in the United States at the moment. It may not be when it starts to hurt, but at the moment, this is a very popular move.
Well, it's not very popular, Jack. It's I know where you're coming from, but there's nothing in the polling that would show. I mean, polling's pretty worthless at the moment. You've really got approval ratings, and Trump's are in somewhat of a decline. As you say, the costs of tariffs haven't jumped in yet. And we've seen some sort of mad stuff from the MAGA brigade saying, oh, you don't need to buy new things. You don't need to consume stuff from overseas. We can buy everything from America. And it's all a nonsense, Jack. What you're looking at is them shrinking away to an isolated economy that will do them no good in the long run. I mean, if the United States goes into recession between this time and the end of the year, well, that will probably be the end of Trump. He'll get rolled in the midterms and suffer big losses there, possibly lose the Senate, possibly lose the House, probably both. Those are the sorts of things to come. So the extraordinary risk that's being taken here is not just a political one. It's also an economic one that says we are the country that's basically taken on an enormous amount of risk. Now, the Chinese economy is probably shaky. It's supposed to grow at 5% this year, which is something that we'd all be very excited about if it happened here or indeed the United States. There are major consumption issues and debt issues throughout the Chinese economy. And this sort of standoff between the US and China now will cause both nations considerable harm. And it just seems to me to be utterly reckless to have instigated these policies in this way. If it's popular or not now is of no consequence, because there's a lot of time to run in politics for Donald Trump. There's 3.5 years more. So the consequences around whether it's popular or not are just incredibly. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of absolute rubbish lives and things like that from the MAGA brigade saying this is all terrific, this is all wonderful, this is why it's going to work. Not a sound economic mind among them. And really the US is taking on the enormous risk. So once we start seeing inflation jump in the United States, let's see how they get on. Once we start seeing GDP growth slow, and it will, it's just about how much it will slow, then you've got the consequences. Then you ask people what they think about it. And you ask people who just lost their jobs, for example, and the US did have a major and good announcement on jobs last week, but one suspects that is pretty transient right now.
Well, let's see where it ends up. I don't like tariffs, but I think they can be a good leverage point.
Well, it's you're either a free trader or you're not. And if you're not a free trader, you're in the business of protectionism, and you're in the business of isolated economies that do not achieve what they can. And that's creating jobs for people. That's creating consumption for people. All these sorts of things. Anyway, we'll move on. It must be said that we have a little bit of a message from listener Lawrence, our farming mate. He had a bit of a crack at us early on about comments, I think, last week on ABC Radio. You were a bit annoyed with some of the new faces on radio, some of the new voices on radio perhaps, and they weren't going terribly well in the ratings. I was talking more about management in ABC Radio at the moment. I had to be a bit obtuse about it. But this is what Lawrence said. It must have been 12 or 18 months ago. I listened to a couple of old blokes going on about how the ABC was a backwater of old lefties and they needed to get some new blood in the place. People who know what modern radio was all about, to expand the audience and keep the place relevant. Imagine my surprise when the same two old blokes bang on today, bemoaning the changes made to staff and programming by outsiders, brought in to update the place and get rid of some old lefties. As it happens, I agree more with the latter position, as I think I wrote in a comment when you first raised the subject. I'm just saying that the people who've come in, and I can't be specific, but if you did hear some of these things, you'd be a little bit shocked, Lawrence, that some of the people who've come in have no experience of a national broadcaster. They have been born and raised on FM radio, which is a very different beast to the ABC. And I don't have any problem with them having new faces. In fact, there should be a turnaround of radio and television personalities on a regular basis. Jack?
Yeah, no, I agree about the turnover. I disagreed that they seem to me to be trying to chase the youth vote. And I think that's a waste of time for ABC Radio. I think they should be consolidating what they've got.
Yeah, look, radio.
And you can do that by bringing in new faces. You always need new faces. Well, new voices, I should say. Yes,
all right. Well, Lawrence goes on, Jack, and while we sort of break away from the Trump stuff, he gets us back on track. Then there's the idea Trump tariffs are not just are just a negotiating position, which is what we're alluding to before. That idea doesn't fit with the schizophrenic nature of the Trump administration's ideas that tariffs will also bring back US manufacturing jobs at the same time as it fixes their budget deficit. Everything can't be true, and this is right. I mean, there's so much mixed messaging around this. When Trump floats the idea of abolishing income tax, and we've heard that, whispered at, I suppose. If Trump whispers, I don't think he does, but anyway.
Not going to happen, in my view.
This is some of the MAGA stuff I was listening to. He goes, yeah, well, there's going to be some pain, but you won't pay income tax on your income under $150,000. I don't even know where that figure came from. No one has ever suggested it from the Trump administration. No. Anyway, Lawrence goes on to say,
I've never even seen Trump say that, but other people do say that.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is one of those things, and you know that's not going to happen. One of the shortcomings of tariffs, Jack, is that you don't collect what ostensibly you should, because a lot of trading partners simply stop trading. So if you're expecting a great swarm of money to come into the Treasury, it won't be as much as you think. Anyway, on to Lawrence. The same with the jobs. If a company builds a factory in the US to get behind the tariff wall, they would be expecting it to stay there to protect them. Again, we're going to have economic consequences about this policy. We don't know what they are, but we can sort of indicate where some of the worst case scenarios will be. And that will all happen well before manufacturing facilities are built in the United States to take over in this sort of isolated economy.
Can I just say, it depends which country becomes the isolated economy in this. Is it going to be China or is it going to be the United States?
Well, one of the other things to watch, Jack, is the development of trading blocks. It would make good sense, and I'm sure it's at least been touted behind closed doors that Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Vietnam, China, Australia, possibly even involving India, Malaysia, etc., form a free trade trading bloc.
That's possible, yes.
And that's what the world, particularly if these high tariffs continue, and we have had a 90-day, what do we call it, sojourn, Jack, a 90-day
pause. I think this is the word.
Yes, thank you. And we'll see what happens after that 90 days. But I would think now in this far from certain world, that's what countries will be looking at, multilateral negotiations around trade. All right, social media censorship, Jack. There was a story in the Times, and it said British police are making more than 30 arrests a day over offensive posts on social media and other platforms. Thousands of people are being detained and questioned for sending messages that cause, and this is a quote from the Times, annoyance, inconvenience, or anxiety. Times analysed custody records for 2023. So when we talk about 30 arrests a day, we're talking about a series of arrests that went through 2023, 2024. There were 12,183 arrests in the UK, the equivalent of about 33 per day. This marks an almost 58% rise in arrests since before the pandemic. In 2019, forces lodged 7,734 detentions. So the first thing we would say is that a lot of arrests are being made without very many charges being laid, Jack.
Yes.
And that, to me, is an overuse of policing resources, isn't it?
Well, it's okay. They've got plenty of time because they've decriminalised burglary.
Well, they haven't decriminalised burglary.
In effect, they have.
Stick with me here. You've got finite resources within any police, with any policing department, and they are, because this is easy stuff, by the way. This is someone's made a comment on Facebook or someone's made a comment on some social media platform. That's pretty easy to go and make an arrest, drag that person into custody and question them, and often, as we see, not charge them and then release them. Other people are charged. The problem with the time stats, Jack, is that it doesn't tell us what else that person's been charged with.
Or investigated for.
And when we go, in 2019, forces logged 7,734 detentions. Well, that's not convictions. But these things are, people are being charged with these sorts of social media type offences, but often in conjunction with other more serious offences that the Sunday or the Times didn't really take into account.
But these 30 arrests a day aren't charges; they're just arrests.
They're, that's right, and I'm just still looking for the figure on it, but it's rare that not rare, but at least half of them are not leading to convictions. So you've got police, as I say, it's easy.
Not even leading to charges.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I mean. Yeah, sorry, I mean I said convictions, but yes, they're not even getting the charges. They'll often be detained and spend an afternoon in a holding cell, be interviewed, and then let go, and that's where it ends. It's not a good use of police time.
This problem started in the UK in the late 1990s.
It started when?
In the late 1990s, 1999. The police started what they called non-crime hated incidences. It arose out of the inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence, a black kid who was killed in what seems to be a racist attack. And from 1999 on, from 2000 on, the College of Policing invented this new concept called a non-crime hate incident. And that meant that the police ought to investigate what they called a non-crime hate incident, which was, it started out just with racial overtones, right? This is a situation where there is no crime, but the police should still investigate it. And that's been going on for 25 years now. And the problem with this is that if you're investigating a crime, crime's kind of objective, that the crime either exists or it doesn't. But a non-crime hate incident or all this offensive stuff they're talking about with the social media, that's subjective and it's too inconsistent. In any event, what's happening now is they're arresting people to investigate whether a crime might be committed. That's the wrong way around. You're supposed to work out, is there a crime, and then go and investigate that crime.
Well, yeah, the Times article is a little bit deceptive, Jack, in that while it lists 33 people a day being arrested for malicious communications, it also must be understood that they may well have been arrested for other offences.
Yeah, it could be.
And that's where the stats are real. That's where the data goes missing a little bit. Yeah. What I'm saying is, if these things on their own are investigated by police, one, it's a very easy thing to do. Two,
we haven't even got to leave your desk in some cases.
It's not a good use of police resources. Yeah. However, there are some other issues that if people are involved in malicious communications, then they may be involved in other more serious offences, and that's not really shown to us in the script. I understand the freedom of speech items. I tend to support them, but Jack, increasingly, social media has become a very, very dark place, certainly in some parts of it anyway. And we wanted to talk a little bit more about stuff that's basically affecting children. You've got 16-year-olds bullying 14-year-olds online, and that might sound sort of esoteric and ethereal, but there's groups around that are causing extraordinary harm to vulnerable, and I call that all kids at that sort of age, teenage years, are vulnerable. Have you heard of a group called 764, Jack?
No, I hadn't until you pointed them out to me, no.
Yeah, so and it's one of these amorphous groups. You know, it's got elements of Nazism, it's got elements of occultism. There have been a number of arrests made in the United States, Canada. In fact, the CBC, the Canada Broadcasting Corporation Commission, I think it is, did a story on 764. And there've been a number of arrests in the UK. And what happens with this mob is that they will, and as I say, it's 16, 17, sometimes a little bit older into adulthood, but not much older than that. They will pick out one person. In fact, they might have a stable of vulnerable people that they manipulate. The first step is to obtain photographs of them naked, and they use that of these teens. Which is obviously a very serious offence on its own, and they will use these images to basically blackmail and extort the individuals that they're standing over, that they're bullying, and that might start with small offences. They'll encourage them to commit shoplifting. They might ask them to scar their bodies with Nazi symbols or other symbols of this particular group, and at its worst, it can lead to them propelling people under all these threats to go and commit very violent offences, including terrorist offences in the West somewhere or other. That's the ultimate game. One of the other really more sinister games that this 764 group plays, that they will take someone, they will extort one person to the point where that person simply finds that they have no way out other than suicide, and they will urge them on to do so. So there's really some ugly stuff there, Jack.
And that's what the police should be spending their time investigating, because these are crimes.
Yeah.
The other stuff's not crime.
Well, it's CSAM. Straight off, it's once that photograph or photographs, images, sexualised images of a teenager are sent to another teenager, that's a serious offence right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously these things are very much more difficult to police than a Facebook entry. These things basically resort to the dark web, or in places like Telegram groups and things like that are not easily monitorable.
But this is not what the Times was talking about. The Times is talking about people being arrested and not charged. So they're being bunged off to the police station for 8 hours or whatever. Like they can hold them for 8 hours in the UK, but they're bunged off there, but not charged. What you're talking about, something quite different. These people should be charged.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically what I'm saying is that what the Times article is talking about is exactly the sort of behaviour that would be the start of this sort of grooming process that groups like 764 would be on about. You know, there are other groups, and listeners may never have heard of them. There's Order of Nine Angels. 764 sometimes go by the name of the Com. They're small groups, but they cause enormous harm. So, I mean, let me ask you a question, Jack. If 30 years ago someone said to you, or Mark Zuckerberg marched up to you and said, listen, I'm going to create this platform that will allow you to communicate with people that you haven't heard from for a long time, that you will be able to speak to people in real time, and you'll be able to engage in your community just by sitting on your phone or on your laptop. And then went on to say, look, there's probably going to be a lot of violence as well. They're going to be incel-type groups, and this 764 got serious incel vibes about them. They're going to be incels. They're going to be mass shooting events. It's another thing that 764 try to extol their victims to do, commit shooting offences in high schools and in other public places. You would say, you know, and if you understood the great harm that social media can cause to individuals, you wouldn't have allowed it in unregulated, would you?
Gee, I'd hoped. He said, look, give me all your savings and I'll put them in Meta shares and make you a very rich man.
Well, Google, you'd probably be better off. But
yeah.
There are some really ugly sides to social media. I was not a fan of the ban on that the Albanese government brought in on the ban of social media users under the age of 16. I'm not so sure about that now, Jack. I'm not so sure that I haven't had a change of heart. I think I have had a change of heart. But when you look, you know, and yes, I've probably got a propensity for looking in dark places. But gee whiz, mate, there's some shocking stuff going on here. So we do need police surveillance of the internet. We do need this stuff. What you're talking about might be someone who's made a racist remark on Facebook and then gets pulled up by the coppers. And I agree with you that is a waste of resources. But what we also might be looking at is someone who makes a racist comment about someone who is actually going on to stalk that person and make that person's life a nightmare. So there's a bit of that going on.
Yeah.
Now, All right, Jack. Meanwhile, in France, far-right leader Marine Le Pen has vowed to pursue her presidential ambitions, comparing herself to Martin Luther King
I
and
did
Alexei
like that.
Navalny.
I did like the Martin Luther King bit, you know.
What about the great French saint, Jack? She didn't call upon. She didn't call upon the medieval
Arc.
saint. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't call upon that. But anyway,
Probably she thought no one would remember her, but they might remember MLK. You know?
I couldn't remember. So yeah, they might remember and Alexei Navalny.
Well, she reminds me a lot of Martin Luther.
Bit of a stretch. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Well, and Alexei Navalny almost certainly was too, but in prison. So a bit of a stretch. But anyway, her young leadership, possible rival, Jack, Jordan Bardella, he's the National Rally chairman. He said he could run for the presidency himself if Ms. Le Pen was unable to attend.
That seems to me to be the most likely outcome, I've got to say.
Yeah. And really for the National Rally, RN, it's probably the best solution.
It probably is. I think he'd probably. He's only 29. I think he'd probably win the election because the conviction of Le Pen is just going to feed into support for her side of politics. It's not going to help the other side at all.
No, that's right. So, just getting back to the MLK and Alexei Navalny references, we will follow the example of Martin Luther King, who defended civil rights, she said. And she also compared herself to Navalny, Russia's late opposition leader. But we don't have a quote there. But anyway, the Wall Street Journal had a bit of a crack, Jack, and they reviewed court documents in relation to Le Pen's conviction. And she was and declared that she was at the heart of a system to create contracts that directed a total of 4.4 million euro in EU funding to members of the Le Pen family and the party staff in France between 2004 and 2016. The contracts benefited, among others, Le Pen's sister, her former sister-in-law, and Thierry Leger, who worked as a personal bodyguard for Le Pen. So it's got a bit of a stench about it, Jack.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the family connections, although she won't be the first politician who's ever put family on the payroll.
It doesn't make it right, though, Jack.
No, it doesn't. I would say this about the transfer of funds, say, from the EU Parliament back into French politics. I first came across this tactic in the late 1970s, where Labor politicians would employ someone where they could get a payment from them from the federal government or the state government, and then have them work in an area of real need for the party somewhere else. Like you were put on the staff for a minister, but you went and worked on election campaigns or for the marginal seats campaign. And this has been going on forever. It looks to me...
It certainly bends the light. I mean, I think probably the best example that our listeners might recall is the red shirt brouhaha down in Victoria, where state treasury payments, the state of Victoria was paying Labor, I think they were volleys, most of them, were paying them money to conduct party promotions.
Yes. Yeah, like I say, this has been going on.
Nothing happened there, by the way. It was apologies and, yes, we mustn't do that again. But but it's a little bit different here with Le Pen, and I tend to agree with you. I think probably the best thing her party can do is very quietly move her aside over a period of time and bring in the younger face.
Yep.
All right. Just one little bugbear of Jack's climate change that may or may not exist. But Emma Pinchback, the new chief executive of the Climate Change Committee, said net zero meant flying should be considered a luxury, with airlines paying a price for the emissions they produce. However, she said it would be unfair to price lower income families out of air travel altogether. That just sounds like 2 bob each way to me, Jack. Or 5 bob. Going back a few years there with 2 bob, but yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder why they feel the need to go out and say these things. They can't possibly help their cause.
It can't possibly help their cause, and also it's entirely unworkable. I mean, and she's sort of acknowledged the problem there. I mean, people are high wealth individuals. They're not getting on the Qantas burners. They're jumping on their own or chartering jets. So I don't know what we do about those people, Jack. So I don't reckon you've flown on a plane for about 5 years.
It's longer. No, I did get as far as Bangkok recently, but
Recently. Well, look, you're a walking model of climate common sense, Jack. You barely emit any carbon. The occasional fart might be the only time.
Yeah, I'm the Greta Thunberg of Hong Kong.
There you go.
No doubt about it. I don't have a car. I don't walk, but I just wonder what's going through these people's minds that they think this is going to help our cause.
You're dealing with something that's esoteric too. So you're talking about something that might be considered policy, not by that person, not by the person making the statement, but might be considered policy by a government further on down the track. The idea is that you are just deliberately upsetting people without anything concrete to work off. It's just one of these silly things like, we have to stop eating beef, and start eating plant-based stuff. I mean, no one's going to listen to it.
I love it when they carry on about how much water it takes to produce a steak, right? Particularly in a place like Australia, because most of our steaks in Australia are produced by cows eating grass. And that's water that falls on the grass. It's not water that you can put somewhere else, And,
well, I mean, there's irrigation and all these sorts of things, but I mean, if you looked at a piece of steak as compared to, let's say, a cos lettuce, I guarantee you the cos lettuce will take up more water and provide very little by way of carbon reduction. But anyway, we must move on. Ukraine, Jack. A Russian missile attack on the central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi has killed at least 18 people, including 9 of the 10 were children. And this is the hometown of Volodymyr Zelensky. Russia's defense ministry claimed a high-precision missile strike had targeted a meeting of unit commanders and Western instructors in a restaurant. That up to 85 were killed. It provided no evidence. But they're still going after civilian centres. And I think the likelihood of a ceasefire there is now even more diminished.
Well, it's certainly a stalemate, I think, as to whether it's going to go on or not.
Well, Putin did ask, to suggest, a bit of a thought bubble of his, that a UN peacekeeping force should be installed in Ukraine. Jack, good idea?
They're never a good idea.
You wouldn't want to put the pale blue helmet on for that one. Let me tell you that. You'd just be cannon fodder. So, yeah, I think we're a long, long way from a ceasefire. Gaza, Jack, Palestinian detainees released back to Gaza have told the BBC they were subjected to mistreatment and torture at the hands of Israeli military and prison staff. There's also the issue of the aid workers, Jack, and it seems to be that the IDF would have tried to get away with its explanation of these aid workers returning, or not returning, but opening fire on IDF soldiers. But a camera has been acquired that showed that was not the case, Jack. So it's getting very, very ugly there now. I know Trump met with Netanyahu earlier in the week, and they're still talking about removing Palestinians from Gaza, not temporarily, but permanently.
I can't see where they're going to go. The Arab world won't want them.
Yeah, I think the 18-hole golf course and the shopping centre in Gaza may be an idea that's time has not yet come. Certainly some pretty ugly stuff there, and I know that I'd like to think that some of our Jewish listeners would be alarmed at what's going on there at the moment. It just seems to be, certainly the perception, if not the reality, is that Israeli is the IDF are involved in a sort of, I guess, a cleansing sort of mission. And Hamas is basically on its knee. I don't understand why the ceasefire didn't hold. We have no information as to who broke it, do we? Who broke the ceasefire?
No.
Yeah,
There is a solution.
Very difficult situation.
There is a solution. Hamas surrendered.
Well, yeah, and yes, I know it's a solution, and it should happen, but they're not going to relinquish what little power they have left, are they? I mean, you're just going to have to think that one through. All right, but we need to move on to sport, Jack. There's a lot happening there too. Will Pekoski retired at 27 after multiple concussions. He's indicated that he will go on to coach in cricket. I think Melbourne Cricket Club is his club, and he was looking to do some coaching there. It's a great shame, isn't it? A hell of a batsman. Only played the one test for Australia.
I think he retires with a first-class average of 45 plus, which puts him in very good company indeed.
I did see some of the comments around the announcement, just, punters' comments on news articles saying, he had a poor technique against the short ball. I don't know that that's quite right. He may just have been horribly unlucky. He's a beautiful offside player, beautiful off the back foot and front foot, very good offside player. There are some very good and fast bowlers in our Sheffield Shield competition, Jack, and you've only got to miscalculate, or the ball's got to jump up a little bit higher than it normally has, and you're in a bit of strife.
You don't average 45 in first-class cricket in Australia if you can't play quicks.
Yeah. It's a great shame. I mean, imagine an alternate reality where Pekoski was opening with Dave Warner a couple of years ago. Perfect foil, I would have thought, for him, in that he's an accumulator rather than a belter. Will Pekoski's never really spent a lot of time in T20 cricket and short form cricket. So he was a genuine test player. It's a great loss. It's a great loss. Great loss for him personally. It must be so frustrating. But he still does talk of, pretty serious symptoms in relation to these concussion injuries he's had.
Yeah, it might just be that he's very susceptible to the sort of damage that he's suffered.
Yeah. I think that's where it is. I think that's what we're talking about, and it might be a physiological thing. I don't know, but it's just a great loss, great personal loss for him, because he was quality. He was real quality. The Melbourne, it's not often that we'll be talking about Melbourne grade cricket, but they did have their final, Jack, and St Kilda have won after making 628, finishing on the top of the ladder. They have the benefit of a win or a draw. Draw's as good as a win, and they just battered and battered and battered, Jack.
As you can in a district cricket final down there at the Albert Ground, I presume?
Yeah, I actually went looking to see where it was played, and I was thinking it might have been at Junction Oval. Junction Oval. Yes, there it is. Yeah.
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah. This has been going on for a long time. It used to be a photo in the front bar of Melbourne pubs of Bill Laurie at the Albert Ground. I think he was captain at Northcote.
He was captain at Northcote. I know this.
And they were playing Essendon, and Essendon had rattled up 400 on the first weekend. And legend has it that Bill sat down with his teammates and said, "Look, I can knock 200 of these up myself. Surely you weak so-and-sos can knock another couple hundred up between you." And the photo is of Bill with in front of the scoreboard as they passed the Essendon thing, and Bill did indeed make 220 odd.
He got 220, and I think he, from memory, batted for about 3 days as well.
Did.
So
they were untimed finals in those days.
Look, it may not have been all that great to watch, but that's the way it works in a lot of cricket competitions, certainly in park cricket as well. If you finish on top, a draw's as good as a win.
Good as a win, yeah.
And you can bat
as
and
it
bat and
needs
bat.
to be. As it needs to be. You've got to have a winner. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, just in that game, Jack, Marcus Harris got 161. The Australian former Test opener flew to the UK, and his first game with Leicester, Lancashire,
Yeah.
he scored 138 v Middlesex at Lords. He's in runs, and he said before the Junction Oval game he was struggling a bit, but just had that time and composure to work his way through to 100 there, and then he's back in runs. So 138 for Lancashire at Middlesex, at Lords, is something that he will have ticked off on the bucket list, having scored 100 at Lords. He would not be without a chance to be opening for Australia, wouldn't he? Of the existing openers, he's into his 30s now. I think he might be 32, 33.
He can certainly play.
He's a good player, and we're obviously going with the New South Wales Wunderkind, but in the World Test Championship. But I think it's nice having Marcus just being there. I think it'll be nice that he's spent some time in England playing a fair bit of cricket. Quite a lot of our Shield players playing county cricket at the moment. Meanwhile, Jack, in the NRL, the Eels, Roosters, and Panthers. Now they're the three biggest clubs in the Sydney comp. Huge memberships in terms of their clubs, or the licensed clubs behind them. Big cash machines too coming out of the Parramatta Lease Club and Roosters Lease Club in Eastern Sydney, and the Panthers in Penrith, of course. And they're all sitting on the bottom of the ladder, Jack.
I noticed that.
Look, shows you what I know about rugby league, because I just declared the Panthers were going to win. They're going to win the comp without too much trouble again after I think they got beaten by the Storm, but only just. And the Bulldogs, Jack, Gus Gould has taken them under his wing, and they're on top, Jack, looking like finals.
Yeah, Gus Gould's a bit like Marmite, isn't he? You either like him or you don't.
Well, there's also the case that once Gus has been in your club, there's going to be a fair amount of friction, and then it will blow up at some point. Of course, Panthers are a very good example of that. They had to get rid of him, and once they did, the Panthers really started well. They started winning premierships. But I think Gus should accept some of the credit for it, because he sort of built the junior clubs up around in that area, and brought some talent into the Panthers. But yeah,
there can be no doubt that the man's got ability, because he does produce success. It just comes at a bit of a cost as well in terms of harmony, etc.
Well, my favourite story of Gus, Jack, is that he moved into the house in Yowie Bay owned by George Freeman. And Gus would say, look, when I did a bit of gardening, I didn't do a lot, but I didn't ever dig too deep. I always just a little bit of a shovel, a quarter of a shovel, because you never know what you dig up around at George Freeman's place. Gus Gould lives there. Anyway, AFL, we've got the Gather Round, Jack. I think it starts tonight, doesn't it?
I think it might start tonight, yes.
With everyone playing in Adelaide, and some quite big games being held at the Norwood Oval. Obviously, the Adelaide Oval is going to be pretty busy. Yeah, it's Adelaide Geelong tonight, and that's at Adelaide Oval. Yeah. Collingwood Sydney on the Friday at Adelaide Oval. And then the Saturday, the BP ground. There's Norwood's ground, which is a lovely old sort of beautiful stand. You'd be lucky to get 10,000 people there. And then there's BP.
It's a nice ground.
What is it?
It's a nice ground.
That's the one up at, that's where North play Gold Coast. That's the one basically on the foothills, isn't it?
Yeah. The Barossa Park, it's called. Yeah.
And look, a full round there. Sydney had a very good win last week, Jack.
Yeah, North weren't anywhere near their best.
No, they weren't.
But Sydney was quite good. Something that caught my eye last week was something Matt Richardson, the great Richmond full forward and wingman, said, last line, that's from mid-levels to forward, connection is everything.
Oh,
He was watching the Geelong Melbourne game, and the inside 50s were fairly even, but Geelong's that last line connection was 60% to 30 something percent. Right? And I think that's right. I think actually the times moved on. A few years ago, Melbourne were really good because they were terrific at winning centre bounce and contests and all that sort of stuff. But now that's not enough. Times move past.
You're never going to win. You're never going to. And look, it's probably the case it was 10 years ago. You're never going to win enough centre clearances to win the game.
No.
Because you might only have. Well, look at the scores. I mean, that's one thing that people haven't spoken about. It's rarer now that a score, even a winning side, kicks over 100 points. So that tells you that you're only going to get maybe 15 centre clearances, might be 20. You win 2/3 of those. It's still not going to give you enough. And of those 2/3, every one of them turns into a goal, which would be pretty remarkable.
The other thing is that the point that Matty Richardson's making, is that it's the connection into the forward line that matters, and that's about kicking. And we've been banging on about this a bit, but you've got to have good kicks. The Swans have unearthed another one, some kid who was picked up from VFL footy, I think, or country footy. Bice, his name is. But he's just a lovely left foot kick and was picking the eyes out of the North defence.
This is the other thing about drafting, Jack. You're going to find more and more left footers are getting drafted because left footers are considered to be more precise with their feet. Certainly, if you are looking at two prospective draft E's, and one was a left footer and the other one was a right footer, you'd probably go for the left footer. Depending on if they were evenly matched in pretty much everything,
this goes back to the Hawthorn recruiting before 2008. They had an extraordinary number of left footers.
Yeah,
and they could all
tend to be in cricket. They tend to be more elegant to watch. In footy, Australian rules footy, they tend to be just sharper with their skills by foot. I think the other thing that is probably missing from the analysis, Jack, is how you move the ball from your defensive half. I saw Melbourne do a lot of handball in that game, a lot of handballs, run the ball, put speed on the ball, get it moving. The problem with that is that you can cough it up so easily and in a really bad place like the centre of the ground. Carlton have got this problem. The number of dump kicks that come from the fullback line, it's just, that's where you've got to use hands and then get the ball to a clear kicker. Again, I don't think Carlton have those sort of highly skilled kickers that the really good clubs have, and I think they're suffering because of that. Adam Sard might be an exception, but, there's not too many elite kicks in that side, and I think that's pretty much the same with Melbourne. And I think those
time has marched past Melbourne, I'm afraid.
Yeah, look, I mean, I did see their great ruck rover, Christian Petrarca. He was in tears at the end of the game. He obviously cares. He's invested in the club emotionally, as he should be, but he most definitely is. And he might be looking back. I know he was very keen to move. I know he had a meeting with North Melbourne last year. I know that for a fact. I know, and that was never disclosed in the media. I know he had a meeting with other clubs. The problem with Christian, he's such a good player that you're going to have to give up probably two players plus two top end draft picks to get someone like that. And the same will happen if Tom de Koning, for example, leaves the Blues and goes to St Kilda, and you can't blame the bloke. I mean, he's been offered basically $2 million a year by St Kilda.
Can I just say, of all the clubs I saw over the weekend, the Saints stood out to me. They're much, much better.
I've seen them now a couple of times. They're definitely improved. I'm not going to place them in the 8 just yet, but they're not far away. And because St Kilda do have a a bit of a history, Jack, dropping off later in the season. Adelaide might find the same thing, but they've been fantastic as well so far. Brisbane Lions look very, very good. All right, well, yes, we do have a game on tonight. That pleases me because I wasn't sure with this Adelaide weekend. Did you see what's his name? Was it Higgins, the St Kilda player, when he was asked?
I did enjoy that.
He was asked if he what he'd be doing while he was in Adelaide for the weekend, and he said, "I hate
For the whole
Adelaide,
week,
I'd probably
because
staying in my room."
Yeah, playing Game Boy, I think he said something like that.
Pretty funny, but poor old Adelaide, they cop a fair bit. I mean, it's good. I mean, it's a terrific thing. I think it was pretty much worked through by the Premier, wasn't it? And it just must load the economy with a hell of a lot of money over the weekend. I suspect a lot of Victorian clubs are not that happy about it. The Eagles would be, or the West Australians, they'd be happy because it's just like they don't have to fly as far as they normally do. All right, that takes us out unless you've got something really silly, Jack.
No, nothing silly.
Nothing silly at all going on around the world, unfortunately.
Nothing that we haven't already covered, I would put it that way.
Yeah, this is true indeed. All right, well, that takes us out. We did enjoy bringing some of our listeners' stuff. Oh, I did want to mention to you, Jack, you were talking about Basil Zampelis in a previous episode, and we were let know by our mate CD. He said, I just listened to the latest two Jacks, just on HK Jack's point on Basil Zampelis and Greek influence. Did you know that Basil's uncle was the chief stipendiary magistrate for WA for many, many years?
No, I didn't know
Con Zampelis. So there you go. The Greek mafia, Jack. Is that the right thing to say?
The Kazi Mafia, I think they'd probably be called. Yeah.
There you go. That's not casting any aspersions whatsoever on the Zampelis family or indeed our Greek friends. It's just the way things work. All right, so that takes us out of episode 109, and we look forward to bringing you episode 110. See you later, folks.